Hello YouTube, welcome back to Nutkin Farm. Guess where I am? I'm up my bloody tree. And if that rings a bell to you from a 1980s school dance hall, then you're probably the same vintage as me and you're my kind of guy or gal. If you're not, then count yourself lucky because that song was really pretty terrible. I'm up one of my 344s looking disappointedly at the out of season flowering going on at the moment. And I do notice that around the northern rivers these 344s have got themselves confused from all the rain and cloud we've had, so that when the sun came back out they've made a mistake that they made back in 2022 and assumed it must be spring, so out come all the flowers. And it's not a complete write-off. They tend to flower again in the real spring, but maybe not to the same level of vigour because it's just wasted energy. Anyway, I'm down from the tree now. The reason for making this video is an interesting article that's pointed out to me by a couple of people, and it's something I've never done a video on before, and that's a technique that was developed, as far as I know, in Australia but never really used here. It's being trialled in South Africa at the moment, in KwaZulu-Natal. The technique is called topworking, and that is, in this particular experiment in KwaZulu-Natal, they're taking a early planting, of a field of macadamias where they only did one variety, like the 788 or the A4. And because there isn't much cross-pollination between the same variety, they've decided to try and rejuvenate those blocks rather than rip them out entirely, and try and make those trees alternate varieties. And if you're wondering how on earth they do that, well, it's a bit like the way we graft baby macadamias, but instead they chop the tree off at about 1 or 2 meters tall, and then in that tree graft a new variety that then uses the infrastructure of the existing tree that's been chopped and grows a whole new head of a new variety. So in this particular experiment, in a block of 788s, they're grafting on 816. And I'll bring you along this block because in a way it helps you visualise what happens. They chop off every second tree, and rather than let it die like this particular one, they put on a graft here. It grows up using the existing tree infrastructure. They'd have to watch out to make sure the original tree doesn't grow back, or the rootstock doesn't grow back. And the idea then is, because you're using an existing tree rather than planting a fresh one, well, one, it'll have a lot of energy in the roots, so it'll be pushing the new tree out very quickly. And two, when you actually worry about issues like shading, that sort of stuff, looking around here, a new macadamia tree would have a very, very hard time. But one planted in the existing tree has a really good shot at it. And so you end up with, instead of a solid block of 788s, you end up with 50% the other variety, 816. And to give you a little bit of an illustration of what it looks like, this is definitely not a top-worked tree. This is one that was chopped down by the previous owner, and then it re-sprouted out again from the trunk. And at the end of this video, I'm going to link you to a new video out from Tim Hills, the nurseryman, who has done a little bit of a top-working experiment of his own on his farm. And it's actually great to see a new video from him, and it'll give you a little bit of an illustration of what actual top working is, rather than, in this particular case, re-sprouting, which just looks a little bit like it. And this particular one looks like it's re-sprouted the rootstock, and you can tell because what was once a 344 is definitely not a 344 now. That's an old rough bush nut, and not much use to anyone. That stump just didn't die and then just re-sprouted out rootstock. So I get the idea behind top working. Obviously, if you can rejuvenate a block without pulling it all down and replanting it all, you could actually improve the size of the nuts that you're growing by cross-pollination. You improve the kernel recovery. And of course, you might actually be transferring from one poor variety to a newer, better variety, and going ahead that way. Interestingly, in this KwaZulu experiment, they're also topping trees off and letting them sprout back again as 788s to see whether that rejuvenates their production as a 788. And I like that idea. It's got it's got at least some scientific merit to it to say, look, top working is one thing, but what if we just let the tree regrow after chopping it off at the hips? The experiments done in New South Wales showed that the tree never regained its original production when you just literally chop it off halfway up the tree. I've been tempted to do that to one or two of my blocks, but my agronomist threatened that he would dump me and never come back if I did that. So I've left a lot of these trees alone, and I think the solution to them down the track really is a bit more related to pruning than anything else. So top working, why isn't it done here? Well, according to the agronomist Chris Searle, who's been helping the South Africans out, the labour costs in Australia are really too high to do it on an industrial scale. Whereas in South Africa, you've got a much better chance of getting your workers in an army and doing the top working at a reasonable cost, so that, you can then wait the time, get the crop. Obviously, by doing every second tree, you're probably going to halve your crop for a little while. And obviously the labour costs on top of that make it in total a very expensive exercise in terms of lost income and outlays. They just say that in Australia, or Chris Searle thinks that in Australia, it's too expensive a way to go. But are there other problems with top working? I would be a little bit wary of it, and certainly I don't know whether the South Africans have the extreme weather we sometimes get here in Australia, but what I do notice, particularly from some of the trees here that have resprouted, is that the resprouts look fine until a storm comes along. But what often happens when a storm does come along is the new sprout just snaps off. And I think that is possibly something that would happen to a top-worked tree as well, unless it was in a very sheltered environment. And let's face it, not much of the macadamia growing parts of the world would be regarded as sheltered, because it's either subtropical or tropical, and storms are part of the environment. So, the last thing you want, of course, is to spend all this money chopping your tree half off, putting in a new graft halfway up the tree, and then coming along after a windstorm or a rainstorm and just see it's been blown off, because it could set you back however many years to either do it again if the base of the tree's still surviving, or just give up and then do a replant, which is something you could have done in the first place. It'll be interesting to see the results of this experiment, because I think it is one way that we could look at some of the older orchards around the northern rivers in particular, ones that were single variety, that weren't planted with an idea towards cross-pollination. It could be one way to do it. Obviously, there are other ways. There are ones I've addressed in other videos that I've given you, including removing 2 out of 3 rows and then planting a new one of a different variety. That's certainly what my agronomist would favour over something like top working. But again, there's some mathematics involved in terms of cost. Chris Searle is no fool when it comes to the mathematics of costs, and so maybe top working isn't for us. But I'm going to link to you at the end of this video something by Tim Hills, and he's going to show you from his professional nurseryman perspective what the top working actually looks like, so you can see it for yourself. Really glad to be back, guys. I'll be doing another video again very soon and look forward to talking to you then. Bye for now.